The Florida Gators are looking to finish strong before the early signing period begins. We're going to be joined by Brian Smith, Locked On's recruiting insider here on Locked On Gators.
You are Locked On Gators, your daily podcast on the Florida Gators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Locked On Gators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day. We are available daily and free wherever you listen to the podcast. Happy Friday. I'm Brandon Olsen. Find me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Find all my written work with Whole Nine Sports, Giants Country, NFL 33. Today's episode of Locked On Gators is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. If you're not part of the Locked On Gators Insider subtext group, links in the description is joinsubtext.com/LockedOnGators. 2 weeks free, $5 a month after that. No commitment whatsoever. Just a great way to support the show and get inside information like they've been getting recruiting updates, coaching hire updates, and or just names that I'm hearing. But now it's time for Brian Smith. Joining me now for Locked On Gators is Brian Smith, Locked On's recruiting insider. And before we get into it, LinkedIn is the college recruiting sponsor across the Locked On Podcast Network. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. Terms and conditions do apply. And Brian, we're less than a week away from the early signing period beginning. Before we talk about the high school recruits, we'll talk transfer portal. Florida's taken the approach, at least this year, of most of the players that they're in on going in for starters at the G5 level that are looking to take the next step up. You have, if you're looking at just the people that they've contacted, you've got a couple of DBs from the MAC, one from Buffalo, one from Central Michigan. You've got offensive tackle Brandon Crenshaw-Dixon coming over from San Diego State. He's going to be on campus this weekend for a visit. How do you feel about that approach compared to the Power 5 depth player, we'll say?
Well, I think it's a pretty good strategy because you want guys that are comfortable with learning scheme, learning a playbook, and have shown the effort. A lot of the reasons that guys don't make it, no matter what their recruiting ranking, is once they get to college, everybody's good. You have to do all the little things, and some guys just don't want to do it. It's one of the main reasons college coaches get so frustrated with what talent they have, because those kids don't allow them to maximize. So I'm not really surprised. Napier and his staff are taking an approach that's similar to a lot of other schools, Saban and everybody else. You look at the kids they kind of bring in, how many of them aren't experienced? It's a pretty low number. We can talk about it from a lot of perspectives. If you take the 5-star backup that's at Georgia's, it's a freshman, that's kind of a different deal. He's just waiting in the wings at Georgia, but there's only a few schools like that. In general, I'll take the experienced guy, so I like it.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about this because I am of the approach of, yes, I like going for a group of 5 starter as opposed to a Power 5 backup. Like you mentioned, Georgia guys, a lot of them that hit the portal are young, but we'll use, just for argument's sake, we'll talk about Jalen Kimber. Was a backup for a few years at Georgia, was supposed to be a starter, then he got hurt and became a backup and is never really taken that back. Hasn't panned out at Florida. What do you think of when you look at that? Like a guy who's been, we'll say, in the SEC for 3 years as a backup. Is that something where we can just go, oh, like he just hasn't gotten the opportunity yet? Because in 3 years, you think.
That makes sense. Well, you got to do your due diligence. You got to talk to people behind the scenes because there are questions on both sides of that. Okay, he's really talented, but he's not playing. I get it's Georgia, but why didn't he get any significant playing time? Is he injury prone? Has he been suspended much? Unless you know those answers and definitively, I wouldn't touch it because there's just too much unknown with it. Kirby doesn't care. He's going to play the best guy. It doesn't matter if he's from Texas. Doesn't matter if he's from Washington, New Jersey. He doesn't care. So, yeah, I would make sure that you did your due diligence because otherwise walking into a fire right there, that's how you waste scholarships, man. You got to make sure you know what you're getting.
Yeah, and looking at the transfer portal in general, I feel like it first off, it just is a whirlwind. Like guys are just every day. There's big names hitting it. It's a wild time, but when you're trying to use the transfer portal for recruiting, where we saw, I mean, TCU last year brought in, I think, the highest rated transfer portal class. They had a ton of guys coming in that was like, all right, they're going to replace a bunch of their talent. Ole Miss this year is off to a hot start with it. Notre Dame is also off to a hot start with the transfer portal. How important is it to get the eval right immediately? Because if you're bringing someone in and you're like, all right, we're going to bring him in as a starter, like you get the eval wrong and you've risked it all for someone to immediately contribute. And it's yikes, which, I mean, you can even say that for Florida. They've had a few of those guys where they thought they had the eval right, like RJ Moten, and it just didn't work out immediately.
It's pretty interesting you bring that up because schools have guys that are dedicated to the portal now. They get the transcripts and all that stuff, and they hear about stuff. These phone calls and all that happens way ahead of time. If you didn't know already, when a player submits his name, believe me, that's not the first time he was thinking about it. Okay, I'm just going to leave it at that. You can connect the dots from there. But yeah, there are people that are connected to it as their primary job. They report to the staff. They report to the head coach, the AD, trends, because everybody's trying to learn on the fly here. It's a big job now. I imagine moving forward, it's almost going to be like a general manager position for colleges. Because if you can't also retain some of your guys, like what practices can we take to get guys to stay? Like it's a big deal. Multiple people on the staff, etc. I think you're looking at a long-term problem for all schools with this, because it's one thing to get them, but I mean, when the other guy's walking out the door, there goes your depth because these kids all want to play. So, man, it's confusing for me, and I know it is for you because we text about it and stuff. It's just, wow, did you see that one coming? No, I didn't. You know, and it happens, like you said, every day. So I don't even know how to really address it for Ford or anybody else, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned general manager. We've seen some Power 5 schools make that leap. We've seen Ohio State, Georgia Tech. I think Ole Miss too. They have a literal general manager now in college. It's an insane time. Oh yeah, absolutely get it. I know that. Look, every player that hits the portal and every player, or almost every player that doesn't hit the portal, if you were a high ranking recruit, I know you're getting the DM of just like, hey man, you considering the portal from another school? And those are conversations that are happening all the time. But when you're looking at specifically, we'll say group of 5 to Power 5 transition, are there positions that you look at and you think it's easier to make that transition? Is it offensive line? Because if you're a powerful offensive lineman, if you've got good technique, then you're going to translate. Wide receiver, because playmakers, as long as you get the ball, will make plays wherever they go. Or are there any spots that you look at specifically?
Outside the numbers, I think the athleticism translates a little bit easier. Inside the box, I mean, like you look at the SEC D-line. D-line's just forever been a little more centralized into the mainstream because they're heavily recruited. And it's also a situation where, generically speaking, most of those guys just naturally are strong as all get out. If you don't have big boy strength, like you're a 390 bencher and up kind of thing as a freshman or sophomore in college, you're probably not going to play it for it, along the trenches. Now, out wide at corner, if you're 6'1" and you can run and you were raw coming out of high school and you went to Toledo, but you were a first team all MAC player as a sophomore, somebody pretty good. Those inboxes are going to transpire, guarantee it. Kentucky, maybe it's Clemson. I mean, they're even considering, like, look out. I mean, they're offering portal guys now. So it's open-ended there. I don't think the line of scrimmage is where you get your portal guys, generically speaking, out of the G5, but there are some exceptions. Joyce Lackman, I mean, look at him.
Joey Slackman.
Yeah, I mean, it's wild because the ones that are good are like, it just doesn't matter. Like Jared Verse, you watch him and go, okay, I get it. I get it. But those are the exceptions, not the rule. So, yeah, I think you're going to see more corners and receivers, some safeties, probably more than anything else.
Yeah, the ones that do translate in the trenches are the ones where you watch them as freshmen, sophomores, and you're like, all right, grown man strength. Got it. I get it. That's what will go over. We're a day away from bowl season beginning, and no matter where you live, as long as you're in the continental US, there's a decent chance that there's a bowl game being played near you. Game Time is the place for last-minute ticket deals. The Game Time guarantee means that you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Snag tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's LOCKEDONCOLLEGE with no space for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. That's code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 with Game Time. So download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. For Florida, we've talked a lot just with each other and just me on the show about Florida in the public perception angle of things, how, you know, the Jaden Rashada situation, losing commits. And I mean, Jamonte Waller was a huge deal. Started off a great recruiting weekend for you with Florida back in June, and then he flipped. It appears that LJ McCrae is going to be a Gator. He tweeted the 1 week until I'm a Gator graphic, which everybody did except for him, Xavier Filsaime, and Amaris Williams, if I'm not mistaken. I'm taking that as LJ McCrae saying that he is going to lock in the eyes of public perception. How does that bode for Florida? Because you didn't gain a commit, but you did retain one that quite a few people were like, oh, he's going to be leaving. Like once he booked the Auburn visit, Florida fans lost their mind. Like they were like, oh, he's gone. Auburn is the boogeyman now for Florida. So they were very confident he's gone, but it appears he's going to stay. So how does that bode for a public perception victory, if you consider it one at all?
I think it's a really big deal because A, he's D-line, B, they're thin at D-line, and C, he's from Mainland High School in Daytona. That's right down the road from Gainesville. And then finally, for the love of mankind, just stop the bleeding. Like, for the love of mankind, Florida's class has imploded. That's important, man. You got to get somebody up there. I mean, at some point, they're going to call you and ask you to put a helmet on. Now, I don't think you're going to hold up well at 3-tech. So
I'll try my best. I could get skinny. I'm a threat there. Just let me shoot the gap.
Anyway, moving forward, it's just one of those deals where you can't lose that many guys and people not be ticked about it. Do you blame the Florida? I mean, you got to deal with them every day. I don't know what the decommitment list is, but wait till Williams decides he's going to jump too. I don't think he's going to UF. I'd say that's an Auburn, Ohio State deal. I'd be my guess, barring something else. I mean, I think that's the last two. So Florida's taken on enough water. It was good for them to get a win of sorts, if you will, whatever they can get. So good for Billy and his group.
Yeah, you mentioned that Amaris kind of feels more like an Ohio State Auburn battle, even though he is a Florida commit right now. I feel like Florida's on the opposite side of that battle with a different commit, because you have Jaden Ball, who's an Arkansas commit, but at this point in time, It's like, oh, he's Florida, Alabama. He's got a Georgia Tech visit as well. It feels like he's going at this point anywhere but Arkansas. But with Trevor Etienne gone to the transfer portal, man, let me tell you, if he goes to Georgia like we're expecting, the timeline is going to blow up the day that happens. I just want to get that.
I'm going to be there for the entertainment. By the way.
Oh man, I'm gonna. I've expected it for weeks now, and I'm still going to be pissed about it. But with him gone, how important is it for Florida to add a second back to your class like Jaden Ball, which again has become now more Florida, Alabama, Georgia Tech than anything else, where Montreal Johnson is expected to come back, but has not definitively said he's coming back.
I was waiting for you to say it that way.
Yeah, he has not definitively said he's going to come back instead of declaring. Besides that, Trayon Webb had 30 touches all last season. Cam Carroll had a major knee injury right before the season started. How important is it for Florida to add a second back in this 2024 class?
Huge. Running back is a spot where there's injuries to begin with. You need to reload. And quite frankly, Florida likes to run the ball. They need 5 backs on their depth chart minimum every year. So, with Carroll's injury and you're not really showing a whole lot of your cards if you're a certain Marshall Johnson, Florida has to play this conservatively. You have to get another back. If it's not Ball, it's somebody else. But sounds like they're going to get him. He's a pretty darn good player. Alabama doesn't just recruit guys randomly. So,
especially running.
They've had a history there. I would imagine that Florida's doing pretty well. And that's the one thing Billy and his staff can sell. Like, hey, man, we are going to run the football. Watch the film. So it shouldn't be that hard.
Let me tell you guys, PrizePicks has been the best way for me to make money playing daily fantasy sports this year. If you've got skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few easy taps and research. It's simple and easy to play with quick withdrawals too, which for me is the biggest thing. I'm not waiting 48 hours. I just won't use your app. I'll keep the money in there until I lose it all, honestly. I'd rather do that. I know it doesn't work like that. Like I know that's not a good thought process, but that is the thought process I'm going to have. It's what makes PrizePicks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege. Use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Remember that PrizePicks is daily fantasy sports made easy. On the defensive side of the ball, Florida, they finally made their defensive backside, which still drives me crazy. They fired Corey Raymond, fired Sean Spencer. Still 2 weeks ago, still don't have a defensive line coach. Just got the DB coach announced earlier this week. I think that was just a massive fumble of timing there, and it was just a mess. But Will Harris, DB coach, was the assistant DB coach with the Chargers. He's someone who played DB at USC under Pete Carroll. He coached DBs under Jimmy Lake for 4 years at Washington from 2018 to 2021. So pretty good DBs came out at that time, couple first-round picks. He's seen some of the best DB coaches in recent history develop these guys. Is that an easy selling point for him along with the Washington resume? Just like, yeah, dude, I've done it. I've lived it. I played college DB under Pete Carroll.
Those are stories that you can share around the campfire, on the phone, in-home visit with mom, bring up pictures of Pete Carroll, talk about a conversation you had with him. If he plays his cards right and he adjusts to each recruit and their family settings, perhaps the high school coach, absolutely. Now, it's still West Coast, but everybody knows who Pete Carroll is if they follow football. Everybody knows who Jimmy Lake is if they're a DB. Those kinds of things are not very difficult. In Florida, it's not hard to sell, as I've said on this show 50 times. It should be an easy point. The only thing that disadvantage right now, it's just relationship. It's not long enough to do much with this class. That's just reality. Starting in 25, I'd expect Florida to bring in some pretty darn good DBs.
That was going to be my legitimate next question about relationship, because he hasn't had that opportunity to do so. We're looking at Florida trying to lock in Zay Mincy, who we'll talk about in a second, trying to lock in Gregory Smith, who we'll talk about in a second, trying to flip Jameer Grimsley from Alabama right now. But when you don't have that relationship, just how far can a resume take you?
Right now, about as far as I can kick a cement block. So
that doesn't sound very far at all.
it's going to favor.
Unless you're Iron Man, that doesn't sound very far.
It's going to be a very difficult pull. I don't see any of those, because why would you go play for a guy you don't know? It's just my opinion. The only thing I could say, like, Mincy likes Florida so much, he might just go there. But again, he played at Daytona Beach, Maine. It's right down the road. He grew up watching the Gators. That would be more of a school choice, and that's okay. But outside of that, I'd be a little leery on predicting Florida getting any additional defensive backs in this class.
Yeah, and I mean, just on the subject of Zay Mincy, how the hell does Florida even get? I know that he's just completely airlocked, right? Like, no one can get a single thing from him. Do you just sell, hey, it's Florida and we have LJ McCrae? Is that what you sell? Because, again, you can't sell a relationship.
Playing time. I mean, unfortunately, for all the wrong reasons for Florida fans, there's playing time available. Look, we were terrible last year in the secondary. Why don't you come help us? I mean, seriously, they were garbage, because they would make 5 great plays in a row, then somebody be running wide open, buck naked down the middle of the field. They they just fail. There's a chance for guys to come in and play. It's wild because they had moments for games they were really good, and then like the LSU game happened. That's a whole other travesty that's undefinable. Yeah, I know. We should write a book about that sometime. That'd be a great time.
I'm about to slam my head into the desk just because you brought that up. Just saying. You're lucky we have to finish the show.
Okay. That's unfortunate, but they have to find a way to get past this point because it's one of the premier DB schools in the country. State of Florida is loaded with DBs. They just got to find a way to get somebody. And they're second signing day. They might bring in a JUCO. They might get it to transfer. But they got to shore some things up and create more competition and figure it out in the spring. Spring ball at UF will be one of the more interesting ones in the country just because of the DB room, in my opinion, because there's talent there. What is going on? I mean, just saying.
Yeah, and the last player to talk about today is Gregory Smith, the third safety, committing on Wednesday. He was supposed to commit earlier this week. It was for weeks. The rumor was that he was going to push it back. He inevitably did push it back. Florida, I feel like Florida should feel like the favorite here, but not having a DB coach for 2 weeks certainly doesn't help you. You texted me about him 3 months ago at this point. It was quite some time ago that you first texted me about him. We haven't talked too much about him, but obviously, I mean, South Florida, Toledo, Virginia, Ole Miss, Vanderbilt are the other teams in his top 6 for Florida. How should Florida feel? And if he does commit to Florida, what kind of player is Greg Smith?
He played quarterback for Sumner High School just south of Tampa. He's got a good arm, very athletic, 6'3", 6'4", can really run. I thought he was as good a player in the greater Tampa area as there was this year, and that's saying something. The key with him is figuring out how to use him as fast as possible, whether it's Florida or somewhere else, because, again, he mostly played quarterback. But he even told me that free safety would probably be his spot. And that was right before the season started. I have a picture of him standing against the wall. I had to back up to get his arm width.
And with the wings, it looked like the Michael Jordan one where he's holding.
It really does. Yeah, like Jordan has a tremendous wingspan, shocker. This kid does too. So, yeah, he's a really good kid, 4.0 student. He's what you're looking for. Kind of a late bloomer, but part of that is just because he was playing quarterback at his high school. But he ain't going to play quarterback for the Gators or whatever school he goes to.
Yeah, can we think about that for why his offer list is what it is? Because you look at Florida, yeah, and it's Toledo, South Florida, Virginia, Ole Miss, and Vanderbilt. And it's like, what even is that list? Because that's not a list of someone that's a group of 5 player, and it's not a list of someone that's a power 5 player. It's just so many. So is it really just he's going to be playing a brand new position, just a pure project?
I mean, he's played some defense too, but I mean, it's still projection. There's not enough film for everybody to feel comfortable. But I mean, he can just run like a deer. Florida State and Oklahoma were interested. I mean, he had some really serious off, but it's hard to figure out where he's going to play. That drives some coaches nuts. But he's a dude. So we'll see him playing for a big-time program at some point, whether it's Florida or whatever. I assume it's going to be the Gators, but he's too good an athlete not to end up in the SEC.
All right. Thank you so much, Brian. This is Brian Smith, Locked On's recruiting insider and the host of Locked On Seminoles. I'm gonna mention that like once every 3 or 4 times I have you on. I'm sick of saying it all the time, but catch Brian all throughout the Locked On College channel and every week on Locked On Gators.
Thank you.
Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day. Every day we are available daily and free wherever you listen to the podcast. We'll be back maybe later, maybe tomorrow, maybe Sunday. Monday at the latest, but we will be back to talk more Florida Gators football. We'll see how news goes. For Locked On Gators, I'm Brandon Olsen. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Find all my written work with Whole 9 Sports, Giants Country, NFL 33, and I'll see you all tomorrow.